This is a recording from the Engaging the Mind lecture series at the University of Virginia. On March 20th, 2008, economists William Shoeb and Terence Rapin of the Weldon Cooper Center presented a talk called Growth, Change, and Community, Economic Development in Central Virginia. They're introduced by Glenn Russ of the Virginia National Bank.
I'm Glenn Russ, President and CEO of Virginia National Bank. I'd like to welcome everyone again this evening to a fantastic Engaging the Mind series. We've been sponsoring this event for several years, and we're always pleased to do so. And tonight we have two fine professors, and I normally don't like to read to a crowd, but I want to make sure I get their bios right, so I've prepared something, and I want to make sure I get it right. So if you'll bear with me, let me read some interesting facts about our two professors tonight. First, Professor William Shoeb, who likes to go by the name of Bill, as I understand it, is the Director of Business and Economic Research at the University of Virginia's Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service. Professor Shoeb is a faculty member in the Economics Department and Public Policy Programs at the University of Virginia, where he teaches environmental, economics, and policy analysis. Prior to this appointment, Professor Shoeb was the Associate Director for Economic and Regulatory Analysis with the Virginia Department of Planning and Budget. In 2000, he received a Fulbright Fellowship for work on environmental economics and policy in Prague, Czech Republic. Professor Shoeb has taught at Virginia Tech and Virginia Commonwealth University and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. He has authored numerous articles, reports, and book chapters. He received a law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School and his PhD in economics from the University of Minnesota. And now, some words about Professor Terence Rapin. He is a regional economist, at the University of Virginia's Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service. Previous to this appointment, he worked as the Director of Institutional Research at Allegheny College of Maryland and a senior scientist at the Spatial Modeling Center in Kiruna, Sweden. He also served 7 years as a city councilman in Cumberland, Maryland, where he played an active role in economic development and neighborhood revitalization efforts. Professor Rapin earned his BA from Frostburg State University and his master's and doctorate in economics from West Virginia University. He has published papers in a variety of economics, planning, and public policy journals on the subject of regional impact analysis, crime, and education. So we have two very impressive individuals with us tonight. So Virginia National Bank would like to welcome to an Engaging the Mind series everyone, including our two speakers. And with that, the show is yours, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Glenn, and thank you, Althea, for having us. We appreciate the chance to be here. Economists are not used to having people actually volunteer to come and have them talk, so for us it's kind of a special occasion. Generally, we have a captive audience that we work with, but we'll see what we can do to keep it interesting tonight. I just want to tell you one word about the Weldon Cooper Center, those of you who may not be familiar with it. The Weldon Cooper Center is an independent institute affiliated with the University of Virginia. We have a number of little units that have all been brought together, I guess, as a matter of administrative convenience, but the theme for all the little subunits of the Weldon Cooper Center is public service. All the units of the center have as their mission providing either expertise or service to a variety of government and nonprofit agencies around the state of Virginia. And Terry and I work with the Economic and Business Analysis Unit, and our job is to provide economic and business expertise to state and local government, and we also provide some work for other agencies. We've done some work recently for New York State on issues having to do with global warming. So we try to do what we can in the area of using our economic analysis for public benefit. Today, we'd like to talk to you about economic development in the Charlottesville metropolitan area, Charlottesville, Albemarle County, Greene, Fluvanna, and Nelson counties. It's an area that's it's a statistical unit in the eyes of a number of federal agencies, and so a lot of the data for on economics and demographics for this area are all developed together. And it's seen as a unit because there's a lot of commuting in between the different units. There's a lot of business activity that crosses the boundaries of the counties. And so we'll talk today about the Charlottesville MSA. All right. First of all, we're going to start. I want to talk about those little clickers you have in your hand. This is an experiment. What we want to do is we want to get some feedback from you. And we're going to start by asking you a little something about yourself, so we can, so you can tell each other a little something about yourselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, we have, the first question for you is, where do you live? And I'm going to go ahead and start the polling. And now what you do is you press the little button on the clicker that is next to the best answer. You have to pick the best answer here because they're all multiple choice. So everyone should press the appropriate answer. Now, if you feel like you press the wrong button at first, it doesn't give you a lot of feedback, just press it again. The system will take the last answer you give. So, is that your final answer? All right. Well, let's see. Okay. Well, we see that as we expected, we're very heavily clustered in Albemarle County and Charlottesville. You see 45%, but we do have a few others. We have 3 from Fluvanna, and then 6 in the other category. I live in Richmond, so if I had had a clicker, I would have had to press the other category myself. All right, so let's move on. We're interested in knowing this because we're going to ask you some questions about your perceptions about the Charlottesville area in a little farther on in our presentation. So what we want to know now is we want some sense of how long you've lived in the area. So why don't you go ahead and enter your answer. We have number 1, less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 11 to 19, 20 or more, but not all my life, and then the natives for category 7. All right, let's go ahead and see what your answers are. All right. We have a group that have a significant group that have lived here all their lives, but a lot of people who've lived here for 20 years or more. That's great. As it turns out, there's a very interesting pattern to people's perceptions about the place they live. There's a tendency for people who have lived in a place longer to like the place they live better. Now, partly that's a matter of selection, right? If you hate it here, you're going to move someplace else, and if you like it, you're going to stay. So as people have lived here longer, you tend to have higher rates of "I like it here" responses. So it's important to know these things before we start asking you other things. All right, now, how do you rate this area as a place to live? Now, 1 is worst and 10 is best. We have to do it that way because we want to measure you against another measure of satisfaction. So go ahead and enter 1 through 10. Let's see. We have 38 responses. Anybody else? All right. So, wow. You guys are very positive about the place you live. Looks to me like the average is probably well up above 8.5, pretty close to 9. That's a pretty positive evaluation. All right. Now, finally, one last question before we get started with some facts about Charlottesville. How would you rate the area compared to 5 years ago? About the same, better, or worse? Everybody giving me the response they want? So, most everybody, the largest group say it's about the same. And this is, again, a pretty positive crowd. The things are either the same or better than they were for the large majority of folks in the room. That's good to hear. That should be music to the ears of folks in the community here. All right, now I'm going to stop with the questions now. We're going to stop getting your feedback. We'll ask you for a little more later on, and I'm going to get Terry to come up and give an overview of the area economy, how it's been changing over time, and some of the issues that are important to people when they think about quality of life in their area.
One of the things that provoked our interest in the subject that we're talking about here today was an article and its quality of life. And they interviewed a number of city, county officials, local activists, and asked them, well, how do you feel about being one of the top-rated metro areas in the nation, according to the first Sperling City Best-Rated publication. And you got sort of a mixed response. Chamber of Commerce said it's great, I believe. The zero population Albemarle zero growth advocates said, well, it's terrible. We prefer to be an unknown commodity here. We know we have a great quality of life, but if everyone discovers us, there'll be a flood of people here which could erode our quality of life. So we sort of are beginning to frame the issue in terms of, asking you what you think of it, and we're interested in comparing different communities and demographics, how they perceive it. Phil has mentioned you live here a long time, there's a pattern that you like the place more, and we also expect that there are differences within the region itself. In fact, you find that with some data that is collected by the Weldon Cooper Center, and that's going to be my next slide here. You'll see a series of lines here, and this is time series data collected from 4 different localities in Virginia. The first one to participate in this survey was actually Charlottesville, and it goes all the way back into the 1980s. Well, I'm not showing you that point here, but I'm showing beginning in 93, you see Charlottesville, this dotted yellow line. Above it is Albemarle County. Below it is Prince William, Spotsylvania. Prince William has been surveying their public every year for approximately the last 15, 16 years. Now, what do you see in this graph? First of all, you see Albemarle and Charlottesville are higher than those other 2 counties. You also see that Albemarle is above Charlottesville, and it's fairly flat. There's been very little difference in citizens' perceptions of the quality of life in the county. You look at Charlottesville, however, it ebbed between 2000 and 2006. So there are these differences based on demographics, based on where you live, and they're probably related to real, tangible things. Now, I mentioned the publications, the cities ranked and rated by Sperling and Associates, that placed Charlottesville really on the map for a lot of people. It rated them number 1. They looked at a variety of different features that characterize quality of life. Did it again in 2007, and Charlottesville dropped to number 17. One of the reasons that was cited for that drop were the rising housing costs and the lack of affordability in housing. Some of the characteristics or factors that they looked at in compiling this data is a weighted index of these various features: population, economy, and jobs, and also healthcare, arts and culture, the environment, and so forth. I'm going to focus on just a couple of different features here, and they're going to be somewhat slanted toward areas where we collect data, and that's a lot of economic, demographic data. Also going to look at crime trends in the region. What you'll find at the conclusion of this is a pretty mixed picture. Obviously, economically, the area is growing. Also, the population is growing. But there are a couple of trouble spots there that obviously showed up in the comparison between 2000 and 2007 and could show up more prominently in the future. As a community, it's important to know these things and to adjust public policies as need be to remedy it. First, look at population. The area has been growing. It's been growing at a pace that's faster going back to 1969 than the nation and the state at large. If you look back, though, growth is, it's been happening for a long time. It's at the beginning that we began tracking this data series, it was going up 5-6 percentage points in the early years. Does anyone want to offer a hypothesis of why that might have happened? Female university admission restrictions lifted, and it resulted in, for several years, a huge growth. And they finally caught up with the men, and I think now exceed the men at the university. So that drove a lot of the early population growth. One of the things you notice in the area, though, also is there's a lot of difference in the growth rates in the region. Actually, Charlottesville and Albemarle have grown a lot less than the outlying counties. However, that doesn't include Nelson County, even though they've received investment in the form of a tourist resort there, which is now just about built out. They've grown relatively little in comparison. One of the theories offered in the article of governing was that there was some sort of announcement effect from this quality of life index being published and showing Charlottesville #1, that we had this huge in-migration of folks. Well, if you look at the demographics of migration in the area, there's actually a lot of international migration into the area. And if you look back at 2000, it's more international than it is national migration. The other thing you notice is estimates, population estimates, actually show migration indeed bumping up in 2005, 2006 from lower levels. However, so does employment growth during the same period. So is this a question, is this really amenity migrants surging into the area, or is it job growth that's spurring the folks to move into the area? Well, it's very difficult to disentangle those effects with just these two data series, but I suspect it has a lot more to do with the job growth. Yes, ma'am. Those are actually estimates by the U.S. Census Bureau, and they base them on a lot of different things. They base them on income tax records, they base them on housing permits, and they fuse it in a way that historically it's proven to be a pretty good way to estimate population, local area population. Yes, the internal migration numbers coincide very closely with IRS records. They have their own data series where they track migration of households. So that's more reliable than the other one that I showed you, the international migration. It's more of an extrapolation because we don't have any reliable administrative records on those. So I wouldn't focus on the international figure, but more on the internal, national. Okay, why is the area growing? What are the reasons? Well, lots of human capital, namely the presence of the university, which a Weldon Cooper Center publication showed is the main economic engine in the region, accounting for probably about 30% of the output or the value added in the region. So that's about 1 out of every 3 jobs. Why do firms find the place so attractive? Because you have so many skilled workers, or the availability of skilled workers here. There aren't too many other places in the state that have those levels. You see down here in Virginia Tech land, you see in Northern Virginia in the Richmond metro area, and a little bit down in Hampton Roads. So those are your growth areas in the state. The other thing that you have here, and primarily because you do have an educated public, you also have the presence of a lot of creative people. Richard Florida wrote a book called The Creative Class that I'm sure you're all familiar with, that said that areas that are more tolerant toward diversity, have artist communities, tend to attract creative, intellectual, professional types that create a certain ambiance where high value-added firms want to move, and so they tend to grow. One of the things that sort of offended one of my colleagues, an economist at the Weldon Cooper Center, is that on the creative class index, we're on the lower end, down there with accountants. So now, what has been happening in the economy? Well, if you look at rates of change over time, the area has been exceeding generally both the state and the nation. And another thing that you notice in looking at those series is that Charlottesville is it's a little bit smoother of a less jagged edges on the growth path there. Okay, it does follow the downturns and the upturns in the national economy, but with fewer of the rough edges. And what takes off the rough edges? Well, a steady infusion of government money and the presence of the university, which has a very stabilizing effect on the local economy. You can compute an objective measure of the stability of a local economy, and I've done it here. And if you look at all the metro areas in the state, actually Charlottesville is the most stable. It tends to depart from a trend line of growth less than these other areas in the state that are more reliant on manufacturing jobs. Unemployment, full unemployment, even during national downturns here, well below the U.S. average and a bit below the Virginia average, and consistently over that 15, 20-year time period. If you look at any area in the country, you're going to find that there are industries that are declining and there are industries that are increasing. And what you hope to do is replace lower wage industries that are declining with higher wage industries that are growing. And if you look at Charlottesville MSA here, that's exactly what's happening. So it's much more growth than decline. The big driver, what does this graph show? Well, by the size of the bubble, it shows the size of the sector. So it means there's more employment in that particular sector. If it's to the right here, it's growing in magnitude, greater magnitude. If it's higher up, it's a higher wage industry. So that's not to say that you aren't losing a few jobs in a few industries that are high paying, but it's more than offset by the growing industries. Now let's just, I come from West Virginia, and probably the closest thing in the state of Virginia to West Virginia in terms of the metro area is the Roanoke MSA here. And you see quite a different pattern here. Now, Roanoke is not losing population. It's by West Virginia standards, a boom town. But what you see is quite a different gradient here. You see it slanting the other way. So there's a lot of job destruction in high-wage industries, and it's not really being completely offset with growth in similar service sector high-wage industry. A big circle means big sector. High means high-paying. Across this way means growing, but across in that quadrant means shrinking.
Got it. So the red bubble up here, those are relatively high-paying jobs. It's high up. It's a relatively large part of the economy, and it is on the negative growth side of the graph. And that's the bad news part of the story. And you have to. I don't know why. And you see that sector, the contraction of that sector, it's going to take a lot of growth in these other sectors to make up for what's being lost there.
The big blue is government. The one next to it, the pink one, is professional and technical. Right below it's real estate. Okay, and this is over the period 2000 to 2005. before the real estate bust, so I wouldn't expect to see that same pattern today. The yellow one below the green is construction. The one above it, healthcare. And down here are mainly service, like retail and accommodation, food services. You also have education. What's being destroyed, information, media, newspaper, television, radio, finance, insurance a little bit, and of course farm. Might have been helpful if those were in white rather than black. Apologize for that. Everyone had a chance to scrutinize that figure there? Yes, ma'am. Metropolitan Statistical Area. And that was the census unit that Bill introduced at the beginning. Okay, next slide. What does this all translate into in terms of a sort of basic measure of regional well-being? Well, per capita income is what's often used. And what this graph shows is Yella and Virginia doing very well relative to the national average, and Charlottesville, MSA, doing well to the national average, but below the Virginia average. Why might that be? Because if you look within the region, there's a lot of heterogeneity. Albemarle County plus Charlottesville City at or above the Virginia average. You add in the rural counties on the periphery, they actually have not made much progress since the mid-1990s. They've been pretty stationary if you add them all up. Now, you do see Nelson bolting out of the pack a little bit there recently, probably because of the resorts there. And then you see some, like Savannah, falling off there. I'm not sure. I haven't been here long enough to really know all the stories behind these dynamics here. Poverty rate, you look at recent statistics, and it's starting to head up a little bit, though it is considerably below the U.S. average. Index of income concentration, well, that has been heading up. So there's more income inequality in the area. But that's also a characteristic of Virginia. What makes poverty a bit of a double whammy in this region, however, is that the cost of living is considerably higher than the U.S. average. If you look at other MSAs in the state, and I don't really, even though Washington, D.C. Metro contains part of Northern Virginia, I'm not really counting that as part of Virginia. That's more of a Washington environ creature. Higher than Virginia Beach, Richmond, Harrisonburg, Stanton, Waynesboro, and Roanoke. In fact, if you look at the whole U.S. South of the Potomac River, Ohio River, there are only two MSAs that, according to this ACRA index, have a higher cost of living, and that's Miami and Fort Lauderdale. I guess our first intuition would be that it's all housing market, because we know housing is expensive locally, and indeed this index shows that it is. It's I don't have the numbers there, but it's about 136 on the scale. But it's not only that, it's some of these other component commodities like groceries and miscellaneous goods and services and healthcare just a little bit. Let's look a little bit closer at that housing component, because that's a big part of that cost index. It's about 30-35% of it. If you look at the U.S., you go back to 1985, and you start tracking from a base of 100, standardizing all of these with respect to their price indices. And in 1985, you see really they didn't start diverging here until about 2001, 2002, after 9/11, and the Fed started taking those interest rates way down. Sort of the surprising thing is that Charlottesville is even above the state of Virginia there. If you look and track housing price changes from quarter to quarter over time, you see that Charlottesville is, well, wiggly line there, but if you look recently in the last year or so, according to this, which tracks resale of existing family homes that were financed with conventional mortgages that go through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they show up until the last quarter of last year, the prices are still appreciating a bit locally, though they're tanking elsewhere in the country and the state. What does that mean in terms of housing affordability? I think everyone recognizes that there is a housing affordability issue locally. It exists with respect to people that are looking for single-family homes, but it is especially pronounced for those that are looking for to rent. And what these bar graphs show, however, is that it's not really a Charlottesville metro area problem alone. It's really a state problem, and it's also a national problem. And though it decreased, the problem decreased a little bit for both renters and homeowners in the area, it's still high compared to historical standards. So what's been happening on the construction end? We have these high prices that are enticing a lot of construction activity. Well, it did until fairly recently. And what we see is a precipitous decline here over the last year and a half. Also in terms of total homes sold. If you look at the past history and you track using the same sort of index relative to 1995, 96, you see the nation really had a huge bubble in housing construction there. That's the blue line. And it's sort of surprising to see that Virginia and Charlottesville didn't participate in the same degree that the rest of the country did. And that's because it doesn't have a Florida or a California joining it at the hip like the country at large does. One component that we don't hear a whole lot about is crime, but there is also a bit of a trend evolving here where actually we're starting to buck the trends that are occurring in the nation and the state. Beginning in about 2003, the crime rate in the MSA has started to go up again. Why is that? Well, it's primarily property crime. Violent crime has actually decreased a little bit. And a large part of property crime is larceny, theft. And that's the big green region that you see there. Spatially, regionally, people think it's a Charlottesville problem. It isn't. It's just a Charlottesville problem. Actually, the fastest growth in the crime rate over this period was in Greene County, which the crime rate basically tripled over this period, and it was both violent and property crime. UVA, a relatively small percentage increase. Charlottesville, though it has lots of crimes, it's sort of in the middle there. Okay, so that is sort of a perspective from a sort of a data grubbing guy like myself who just moved to the community six months ago and found some interesting facets to the local quality of life, some things that are going up and some things that are going down. And we didn't want to present them to you before you did your quality of life assessment because we didn't want to contaminate your responses in any way. But we could very well ask those questions again, how you feel about it, and see if they changed any. But how do you change these things? Obviously, being engaged with the citizenry and asking them what they want and how they perceive things, the quality of services, infrastructure, the quality of communication is important. And Bill is going to take this a little bit further and explore what you think of the area's facets and features given that presentation.
So you'll need to get your clickers back out now because we're going to go through a little decision-making exercise here. We're going to get you to give us your assessments about directions for public policy towards some of these issues we've talked about today. Now, in the choices we give you in this particular slide, it's considering local government services on one hand and taxes on the other. We are economists after all. Which statement of the following do you prefer? Now, I want you to notice that there is not an option for more services for less money. If you think you know how to do that, please run for office. I am not a strong believer that there's enormous amounts of waste in the public sector. I've worked in the public sector. Government will always involve inefficiencies. The reason it will is because we turn over to government things that can't easily be handled by markets. We don't have a good mechanism for allocating certain social choices over to private entities to resolve for us. So we hire this big firm that we call government, and we give it this really rough and ready mechanism for responsibility. That is, we have elections every 2 or 4 or 6 years, and the elections are about all kinds of different things all at once. And so we try to use that rough and ready mechanism to transmit our preferences to government about what we want. And then, of course, because we turned all the hard things over to government, we see government not doing a perfect job at solving all these problems, which shouldn't surprise any of us, since the hard problems are the ones we're choosing to turn over to government in the first place. So we're going to make some choices. Yeah, before we make our choices, we have a question.
It was primarily state government. That's primarily university.
Yeah, that's all subsumed in the University of Virginia. So as enrollment has increased, and I wish I had the graph here. We recently did a review of the economic impact of the university on the regional economy, and it's really interesting to see where the growth of the university has come from. The state contribution to the university has been going down in real terms, in inflation-adjusted dollars for, well, I've forgotten the graph, but it's 20 years at least, longer I think. But the state contribution to the university's budget has gone way down and is now something on the order of 13% of its operating budget. Way down, way below what it is in, say, neighboring state like North Carolina. Much of that increase has come from increased grant earning activity at the university. The university's participation in private and federal grant-based research has skyrocketed in the last decade and is responsible for a very substantial fraction of that growth. And it is a government agency, but it's sort of a uniquely entrepreneurial one. Universities have a fair amount of autonomy and have to, by their nature, be quite entrepreneurial. So it's, as a government agency, it does behave in many ways like a firm. But that's the answer. So let me, again, the one choice you don't have is to get more for less. Now, we're always hoping we can do that to some extent, but I want you to make hard choices today. Today, we're going to make hard choices. You get to decrease services and taxes, that's choice 1, keep taxes and services about where they are, or increase services and taxes. So let's see what you think. This is all anonymous. I'm not keeping any of this information. I don't know your names. I'm not going to hold you to it. Some people are having trouble making up their minds here. Everybody done? Let's see what. Now, this is not exactly a random cross-section of the community, of course. So we don't want to take this seriously as a polling result on a random sample. But let's see what just this group thinks. You know, before I asked you this question, I was thinking, you know, when we ask the questions early on, this group is by and large happy with the way things are going here. And I'm not at all surprised to see this result. Here's a group that believes we have about the right balance, by and large, although there are a few people who believe we ought to be pursuing more efforts with our government or less. But by and large, people seem happy with the priorities of the government. Now let's go through some particular issues. And I'm going to run through a bunch of issues, but I'm going to warn you, I'm going to add the budget up. I'm going to go through these separate issues, and you're going to tell me whether you think, whether you're reasonably satisfied with what your government is doing for you, or whether you're dissatisfied. Now, unfortunately, that's a little bit ambiguous, because by being dissatisfied, you might want them doing less, of course, or you might want them doing more. So this doesn't tell us everything we need to know. But if you're going to ask government to do a lot more, we're going to start, get a little pad here, and we're going to start adding up the tax bill. I mean, you've been hearing what's going on in Richmond right now. You know, we can't even, the entire transportation budget of the state of Virginia is about, in a few years, to be eaten up just filling potholes and fixing bridges. Right? So we're only a few years from that point. And so there's very little left over for new construction. And there are certain regions of the state that are suffering quite a lot from that. And yet we're having a lot of trouble figuring out how to resolve that issue. Partly it's a regional thing, partly it's an issue of how much we think we can get out of government for the money we're spending. So anyway, let's try this one. How satisfied are you with your local government's efforts to protect natural resources and the environment? I want you to think more about local things than global things, although I think it is true that Charlottesville has expressed some sentiment toward helping solve the problem of global warming or climate change. Not something we can do that much about, but it's a nice sentiment. So why don't you tell me whether you're satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied with what your regional governments are doing to protect natural resources. We're going to go through some of the other critical areas that Terry talked about. All right, everybody have their answers in. Let's go ahead and see what your thoughts are. So essentially, these are not the people who are writing all these testy letters to the newspapers. This is an audience. Maybe you all are engaged in the decision making, and then hence feel more control and more responsibility. So we have a very almost half of the people in the room, or at least, in fact, more than half are at least somewhat satisfied with protection of natural resources. Let's go on to providing quality education to school children. And this is a case where I wish I could go back and figure out which ones of you were from which areas, because I know in the Richmond area you get very different answers from people in different counties and the city of Richmond on a question like this. So let me go ahead and start the polling. So you can go ahead and enter your response. Very satisfied is one, somewhat dissatisfied, and then very dissatisfied, 4. Ooh, we got more responses on this one. This is great. This one is one that's really important to people. So let's see. Well, I don't know. We've got to find some controversy somewhere here. By and large, people are very satisfied. Now, I guess, I could be surprised at this, but given the early responses we got from this audience, that people they like the region, they're satisfied with the region. A lot of you have lived here a long time. I guess it doesn't seem so surprising after all. Now, how about, is your government doing enough to assure economic growth and job opportunities? See what your responses are. So this is economic growth and job opportunities. I don't expect the whole city council to get thrown out in the next election. Given results like this, they seem to be responding well to their constituencies' desires. How about an ensure safety at or near your place of residence? We only have a couple more of these. But these are obviously, okay, polling's open. Ensuring safety at or near your residence. Another one is a high response rate. Ooh, I think this may be the most responses we've gotten so far on a question. Let's see what your thoughts are. A little less dramatic, but you notice that 88% of the people in this audience are somewhat or very satisfied with public safety protections in the area where they live. Given the recent uptick in crime, I find that a slightly surprising result. That's just me. Okay, I think this is the last one. Provide needed infrastructure. Now, if I were to ask this question in Northern Virginia, I'm pretty sure I know what the answer would be. Infrastructure, of course, roads, sewers. These are coming in pretty fast. Good. Let's see. Oh, interesting. Now, so far, I think this one has the most negative responses of any. A lot of potholes out there. Huh? I am a commuter to the Charlottesville area, and so don't face this problem, but we have our own issues in Richmond, of course. Oh, there's one last one. I'm sorry. Affordable places to live. Of course, we have to talk about housing affordability. This, by the way, is one of the fastest growing elements in the Charlottesville budget in percentage terms. Trying to do something about housing affordability. Let me turn the poll on and see what you think about this. Let's see how you feel. Oh. Well, now this is very interesting. So this is not your problem, probably. This is people thinking about diversity in their community. In Richmond, the way this is talked about politically is, can our policemen and our teachers live here? That's the way the discussion is playing out in Richmond. And so when people talk about the issue of affordable housing, I think we have a new policy program at UVA, and one of the classes we have, teams of students take on clients, and they do research projects for different clients out there. And one of our teams is actually, their client is the city of Charlottesville, trying to figure out what to do about affordability of housing. And it's a very tricky and difficult issue to solve. One of the problems we have with attempting to solve problems like this is a lot of ways you can try to solve the problem will have an immediate benefit, but that benefit goes away, the first people to get the benefit get all of it, and then later on people don't get anything. For example, suppose you build affordable housing in the city of Charlottesville. Well, what happens? You sell it to someone in a low-income group, they buy it, and then someone in a high-income group comes along and says, well, if I bought that house and added a little bit on the back, then that'd be a nice house for me. And so what happens is if you just try to change the capital stock, you may end up not solving your problem at all. To ensure the availability of affordable housing, government has to have continuing involvement that ensures a set of low prices or high affordability for some groups. So it might involve income transfers or continuing efforts to keep rents low, which is, again, a difficult problem to solve. Oh, finally, I keep saying it's the last one. But this is the last one because it really it gets at all the other ones. There's a lot of conversation, certainly I see it in the newspaper, about whether growth in the Charlottesville area is harming quality of life. And so let's see what you think about that. Okay, the poll is open. One last time. Is the government doing enough to manage growth? All right, let's go ahead and close this off so we can finish up. A lot of disagreement here. A lot of disagreement here. In fact, a lot of dissatisfaction with managing growth. Now, we, in our presentation, didn't really show you a lot of pictures of the things that probably matter to people when they're thinking about growth. It's the data on things like, well, how long does it take you to get to the store? How long does it take you to drive across town? Is the wooded area next to the place you've lived all these years suddenly being turned into something less attractive as a neighbor from your point of view? All these issues are really important to people. And so, but there is a very substantial community dialogue going on right now on this very issue. Obviously, there's a lot more to discuss. In any event, what we've tried to do is give you a bit of a snapshot of what's going on in the community around you. And you know, one interesting thing I'd love to hear your questions and comments on is the last issue where there seems to be the most dissatisfaction is the issue of growth and what it is about the quality of life in the Charlottesville area that's made everyone unhappy about growth management in the area, because you all love it here. And yet, for some reason, you think that growth in the area is at least threatening to undo some of the things that you like about the area. And I think it'd be well worth thinking about what those things are and what you might do about them. So anyway, we'll leave it there, and I hope there's time for some questions and comments. Thanks a lot.
I would just interject, Bill. These questions we didn't invent ourselves. They came from the Center for Survey Research at the Weldon Cooper Center. And one of the purposes of using the same set of questions that they use throughout their surveys in the state is that we can sort of benchmark your responses to those, or compare your responses to those benchmarks. And one thing in looking at your responses relative to Albemarle County is that even though the median voter doesn't want to change anything but maybe the infrastructure and the growth management, you're decidedly across the board more negative about everything here. So even though it may only be a minority, it's a more sizable minority than Albemarle County, for instance, because about 80% said they were very or somewhat satisfied with efforts to protect the natural resources environment, to give you an example. And almost 60% were very or mostly satisfied with the efforts to promote the development of a variety of affordable places to live, and so forth and so on. So I don't know if it's a matter of demographics or it's a matter of it's 2 years later, perceptions are starting to change, but it's sort of an interesting result.